The explorers had been wandering through the abandoned Detroit hotel for nearly an hour, their flashlights bouncing off peeling wallpaper and broken chandeliers. The place had been closed since the late 90s, the power grid ripped out and the wiring left to rot. Every hallway reeked of mold and dust, the kind of air that stings your throat the longer you breathe it. They weren't expecting anything unusual. Just another crumbling relic of the city's past, until they stumbled across the old elevator doors. Out of curiosity, one of them pressed the tarnished button, just to see what would happen. To their shock, the circular light flickered red. The explorers froze. "No way," one whispered, his voice caught between excitement and fear. The building had no electricity. Everyone in the group knew it. Yet with a low mechanical groan, the elevator doors slowly slid open, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled faintly of rust and ozone. Inside stood a man. Or at least it looked like one. His figure was tall and thin, dressed in a dark suit that seemed decades out of fashion. The explorers instinctively raised their flashlights, but the beams of light went right through him, as though his body wasn't fully solid. One of the explorers gasped and stumbled backward, while another nervously muttered, "It's a reflection, it has to be a reflection." But the figure was facing them directly, his head tilting ever so slightly, as if he'd been waiting for them. Before anyone could speak, the lights inside the elevator flickered violently. The man vanished in a blink, no sound, no movement, just gone. The explorers stood frozen at the threshold, their hearts pounding in the silence. That's when the elevator shuddered, the cables above creaking as if something heavy had just boarded. Slowly, impossibly, the car began to descend, dropping floor by floor into the basement that none of them had dared to explore. The explorers exchanged panicked looks. "We should leave," one said in a trembling voice. But then they noticed something that chilled them deeper than the figure itself. The button panel beside the doors wasn't just lit. It was glowing, every single floor button pressed down at once. The elevator continued to sink, taking something, or someone, with it, into the darkness below. Two friends, Josh and Eric, had been exploring abandoned tunnels beneath the outskirts of their town. The storm drains were supposed to be empty, just a maze of graffiti, covered walls and stagnant puddles, the kind of place teenagers dared each other to enter on weekends. Armed with only a pair of flashlights and a camera, they laughed their way in, their voices echoing through the massive concrete pipe. For the first 10 minutes, everything was ordinary, just dripping water, the crunch of gravel under their shoes, and the occasional rat darting across their path. But then came the sound. A soft, steady inhale followed by a long, drawn-out exhale. It was so faint at first, Josh thought it might just be the wind squeezing through cracks in the tunnel. "Hear that?" Eric whispered, stopping in his tracks. They stood in the dark silence, listening. There it was again, inhale, exhale, rhythmic, human-like, coming from deeper inside. The boys laughed nervously, telling themselves it was just acoustics playing tricks. But neither of them moved forward. Josh finally tried to shake off the tension. "It's just the air vents," he muttered, though his voice cracked as he said it. He lifted the camera, recording their progress. The flashlight beam danced across wet concrete and faded spray paint, but the breathing didn't fade. It grew louder. What unsettled them most was its consistency. It wasn't random like wind gusts. It was patterned, as if someone, or something, was controlling it. Each inhale and exhale synced perfectly with their own, as if the tunnel itself was alive and breathing right alongside them. They decided to keep moving, joking that they'd meet the world's biggest snorer at the end. But with every step, the sound followed, always just far enough ahead that they couldn't see the source. The tunnel seemed to stretch longer than it should have, the darkness pressing in tighter. At one point, Eric swore he felt warm air brush across the back of his neck, like someone standing close enough to breathe on him. He spun around instantly, but the space behind them was empty, just damp walls and endless black. That's when Josh raised the camera to capture the moment, whispering into the lens for their audience. But as the camera recorded, a whisper overlapped his voice, "Behind you." Both froze. The breathing they'd been chasing was no longer ahead of them. It was right there, only inches away, echoing down their spines in the pitch-black tunnel. When Tyler first entered the abandoned asylum in New Jersey, he thought it would just be another thrilling live stream for his followers. The place was notorious. Rusted gurneys left in hallways, shattered windows, and graffiti warning visitors to stay out. As his phone light cut through the darkness, viewers flooded the chat, spamming emojis and daring him to go deeper. The walls were lined with peeling green paint, and every door seemed to creak with a voice of its own. Tyler laughed nervously into the stream. "Gwess, it's just me and the ghosts tonight," he said, though the tremor in his voice gave him away. At first, everything was the usual urban exploring vibe: silent hallways, echoing footsteps, the occasional sound of dripping water. But about 10 minutes in, the chat started blowing up. "Who's that behind you?" One message read. Another wrote, "Bro, someone's in a gown!" Tyler stopped dead, spinning his camera around. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. "You guys messing with me?" he chuckled, brushing it off. But as he turned back, the viewers insisted they'd seen it. A pale figure trailing only a few feet away. He pressed on, determined not to let paranoia ruin the stream. Every few minutes, though, more comments popped up. He's closer now. Dude, look over your shoulder!" His stomach twisted with unease, but he forced himself to laugh it off. The phone screen reflected the viewer's panic, but when he turned his flashlight behind him, there was nothing but peeling walls and debris. Still, his chest tightened. Why was it always in the chat before he felt it? By the time he reached the patient ward, Tyler's nerves were fraying. Rows of rusted bed frames filled the room, some tipped over, others still standing like crooked skeletons. He raised his phone for a wide shot, narrating for his audience, when the light briefly caught something, a pale hand gripping the edge of a bed frame. His camera swung back instantly, but it was gone. He tried to play it cool, but his voice cracked. "Okay, that was weird." The chat went wild, spamming warnings. They swore the man in the hospital gown was now standing at the far end of the room. Tyler lifted his phone to check. For a split second, the live feed showed him, breathing heavily, holding the camera, while behind him, just over his shoulder, stood a gaunt, gray-skinned figure, its eyes hollow, staring straight into the lens. Tyler didn't see it in person. Only the viewers did. And yet, when he replayed the stream later, the figure wasn't just standing, it was leaning in, inches from his face. The group of four had entered the abandoned high school late at night, their footsteps crunching over shattered glass and fallen ceiling tiles. The air was stale, heavy with dust, and the faint smell of smoke still lingered from a fire that had partially gutted the building years earlier. They weren't expecting much, just graffiti, broken lockers, maybe a few desks left behind. But when they reached the second floor, they noticed one classroom door that stood out. Unlike the others, which were wide open or hanging crooked off their hinges, this one was chained tightly shut, a heavy padlock glinting in the beam of their flashlights. They stopped to examine it, curiosity sparking jokes. "What? They afraid someone's gonna steal the chalk?" One of them laughed, tugging at the chain. But the lock was solid, cold to the touch, and clearly hadn't been disturbed in years. They shrugged and started to move on when a metallic clink froze them in their tracks. Slowly, impossibly, the chain began to rattle on its own. The explorers stepped back as the padlock snapped open with a sharp crack, dropping to the floor with a sound that echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. The door creaked open an inch, then another, as though pushed from the inside. One of the explorers whispered, no way, that just happened." Their flashlights cut through the gap, but beyond the door was only pitch black darkness, so dense it seemed to swallow the light. Then came the sound, faint, high-pitched and echoing, the unmistakable laughter of a child. It wasn't playful, it wasn't happy. It was slow, deliberate, stretched out, as if mocking them for being there. The group panicked, arguing in hushed voices about whether to leave immediately or to push the door open all the way. One of them, braver, or maybe just more reckless, moved closer, lifting his flashlight into the opening. The beam caught glimpses, old desks overturned, torn textbooks scattered on the floor, something scratched into the far wall. But just as he leaned closer, the chain on the floor scraped across the tiles, dragging itself toward him as if pulled by invisible hands. That was when every door in the hallway slammed shut in unison. The sound shook the walls, sending dust pouring from the ceiling. The explorers spun around, their hearts pounding, but the only door still open was the one they wished had stayed closed. The dark room now stood wide, yawning like a mouth, the child's laughter growing louder and closer. The explorers had broken into an abandoned strip mall in Texas, expecting nothing more than dust, broken glass, and maybe some old merchandise left behind. But tucked at the far end of the corridor was a shuttered costume shop. The glass front was cracked, the sign above faded to the point where only a few letters could be read. Inside, however, the mannequins were still standing, dozens of them, arranged in crooked rows like an audience frozen in place. Their plastic faces were blank, their eyes dull, and their limbs locked into stiff, unnatural poses. At first, the group joked about it, shining their lights over the mannequins and laughing nervously. "Creepiest runway show ever," one of them muttered. But as they moved between the aisles, the atmosphere shifted. The mannequins seemed to fill every corner, some headless, others missing arms, while a few still wore tattered remnants of costumes, wigs, torn dresses, masks half fused to their faces. The explorers swore the air was colder here than anywhere else in the building, as if the mannequins themselves were soaking up the warmth. One of them stopped suddenly, his breath catching. Did that one just move?" he whispered. The others laughed it off, but when they turned their lights back toward the mannequin he pointed at, its head was tilted slightly, no longer facing forward, but angled just enough to be staring directly at them. The group froze, hearts racing, their laughter gone. "Maybe we bumped it," another said quickly, though none of them had been close enough to touch it. Still, they tried to shake it off and pushed deeper into the shop. That was when they noticed something even stranger. A cluster of mannequins near the back of the store now had their arms raised, all pointing toward the exit. They hadn't been posed like that before, of that they were certain. One explorer filmed it on his phone, whispering, "Guys, they weren't like this, they're showing us the door." The longer they stayed, the more it felt like the mannequins weren't just objects. They were aware, watching, and urging them to leave before something else happened. Then, as they turned to make their way back out, the aisle behind them shifted. Not just the mannequins, all of them. The sound of scraping plastic and dragging feet filled the air. The explorers spun around, their flashlights shaking, and in that frantic beam of light, every single mannequin's face seemed closer, their heads angled unnaturally toward the group. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Like the mannequins were waiting for them to make the next move. The explorers had finally made their way to the rooftop of the abandoned hospital, climbing rusted stairwells and ducking under collapsed beams to reach the top. The city lights stretched out in the distance, hazy under the night sky, while the building itself groaned with every gust of wind. For a moment, the group felt relieved, free of the suffocating hallways below. They stood at the edge, catching their breath, laughing nervously about how creepy the morgue had been. Then one of them froze, pointing across the gap to the next rooftop. There, pacing slowly along the edge, was a figure. At first it looked like a security guard, tall, broad-shouldered, moving in steady strides as though patrolling. But something about the way it moved felt wrong. The figure was too rigid, its arms hanging unnaturally stiff at its sides. The explorers cupped their hands to shout across, trying to explain themselves before they got caught trespassing. But the figure didn't respond. Instead, it stopped, turning its head toward them in one long, jerking motion, as if its neck hadn't moved in years. The light from the city caught the figure, but instead of revealing features, it only grew darker, like a shadow that absorbed every glow around it. One explorer lifted his flashlight, directing the beam across the gap. The instant the light touched it, the figure stretched. Its shadow grew impossibly tall against the wall behind it, elongating until it looked less like a person and more like a towering, distorted creature. The explorers stumbled back, one of them whispering, That's not a guard." Then, without warning, the figure vanished. Not a step, not a jump, just gone, as though it had never been there. The explorers scanned the rooftop frantically, shining their flashlights over the empty concrete. That's when the wind picked up, but it wasn't natural. It came in a sudden, sharp gust that extinguished their breath and made the rusted door behind them slam shut. Their lights flickered wildly, throwing broken shadows across the rooftop, until finally, one by one, the flashlights clicked off. They were left standing in total darkness, the city skyline still glowing in the distance, but the rooftop around them swallowed in black. And in that suffocating silence they heard footsteps. Not in front of them, not across the gap, but right there on their own rooftop, circling closer with every step. What unsettled people most about these urban exploring encounters wasn't just the stories themselves, it was what happened afterward. Each group of explorers returned with footage, uploading clips to YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit, hungry for the thrill of going viral, and for a while they did. The elevator footage, the breathing tunnel, the Asylum livestream. Each one gained traction, racking up thousands of views, comments, and theories. But then something strange started happening, the channels went silent. Not just abandoned, not just inactive, deleted. Entire accounts wiped clean, as if they had never existed. Videos that once circulated widely couldn't be found anymore, leaving behind only screenshots and secondhand re-uploads from viewers who had downloaded them. At first, people assumed it was copyright strikes, or maybe fear of legal trouble. But the timing was too perfect. One by one, after posting their creepiest encounter, the explorers simply vanished from the internet. Friends of the explorers began speaking out. One claimed his buddy had gone missing just days after their video blew up, phone disconnected, apartment emptied out overnight. Another said her friend stopped showing up to work, and when she checked his place, the door was wide open. His camera equipment still on the table, but no sign of him. Police reports were filed, but most led nowhere. The explorers weren't declared dead, they were just gone. And then came the rumors. Viewers swore that strange things happened when they replayed the footage too many times. Glimpses of extra figures appearing in frames that hadn't been there before. A face pressed against the camera lens. A distorted voice whispering the viewer's own name through headphones. Some even claimed their devices glitched or shut down the moment they hit play, as if the footage carried something that wasn't meant to be shared. It left people wondering maybe urban exploring isn't just about uncovering forgotten places. Maybe those places hold something that doesn't want to be exposed, something that follows you home if you push too far. And maybe the explorers who disappeared didn't just stop posting. Maybe they were taken back into the very darkness they tried to reveal. So, the next time you think about sneaking into an abandoned building, ask yourself, what if you don't walk out alone? What if the shadows that move aren't just tricks of the light? These explorers thought they were chasing adventure, but some of them never made it back. Maybe the real danger of urban exploring isn't getting caught by security or falling through a rotten floor. Maybe it's waking something up that was never meant to be disturbed. Stay curious, but stay careful. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.